The bullet train from New York to DC. It always brings me back to when I first started making this commute. In 2019, I was a freshman in the most diverse Congress in history. Up to that point, it was a critical time. I'll never forget the children in our community. They were so inspired to see this new class of politicians who reflected them, navigating the halls of power. It's often said, you can't be what you can't see. And for the first time, they saw themselves. I think there was something similar with the Green New Deal. We knew that we needed to save the planet and that we had all the technology to do it. But people were scared. They said it was too big, too fast, not practical. I think that's because they just couldn't picture it yet. Anyways, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's start with how we got here. 1977, New York. A senior scientist named James Black made a presentation about how burning fossil fuels could eventually lead to global temperatures rising 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Within 2 years, one of the world's biggest supertankers was outfitted with a state-of-the-art lab to measure CO2 in the ocean, gathering more data about global warming. Guess who was doing all of this research? ExxonMobil, the oil and gas company. Oh yeah, Exxon knew this whole time, as did our politicians. 10 years later, James Hansen, NASA's top climate scientist, told Congress he was 99% certain that global warming was happening and caused by humans. That was 1988, the year before I was even born. So did Exxon listen to the science, including their own? Did they change business models, invest in renewables? No, the opposite. They knew and they doubled down. They and others spent millions setting up a network of lobby groups and think tanks to create doubt and denial about climate change. It was an effort designed to attack and dispute the very kind of science they themselves had been doing. And it worked. Politicians went to bat for fossil fuels, and these massive corporations kept digging and mining, drilling and fracking like there was no tomorrow. America became the biggest producer and consumer of oil in the world. Fossil fuel companies made hundreds of billions, while the public paid the lion's share to clean up their disasters. We lost a generation of time we'll never get back. Entire species will never get back. Natural wonders gone forever. And in 2017, Hurricane Maria destroyed the place where my family was from, Puerto Rico. It was like a climate bomb. It took as many American lives as 9/11. And in the next year, when I was elected to Congress, the world's leading climate scientists declared another emergency. They told us that we had 12 years left to cut our emissions in half, or hundreds of millions of people would be more likely to face food and water shortages, poverty, and death. 12 years to change everything. How we got around, how we fed ourselves, how we made our stuff, how we lived and worked, everything. The only way to do it was to transform our economy, which we already knew was broken, since the vast majority of wealth was going to just a small handful of people, and most folks were falling further and further behind. It was a true turning point. Lots of people gave up. They said we were doomed. But some of us remembered that as a nation, we'd been in peril before. The Great Depression, World War II. We knew from our history how to pull together to overcome impossible odds. And at the very least, we owed it to our children to try. The wave began when Democrats took back the House in 2018, and then the Senate and the White House in 2020, and launched the decade of the Green New Deal, a flurry of legislation that kicked off our social and ecological transformation to save the planet. It was the kind of swing-for-the-fence ambition we needed. Finally, we were entertaining solutions on the scale of the crises we faced without leaving anyone behind. That included Medicare for All, the most popular social program in American history. We also introduced the federal jobs guarantee, a public option including dignified living wages for work. Funnily enough, the biggest problem in those early years was a labor shortage. We were building a national smart grid, retrofitting every building in America, putting trains like this one all across the country. We needed more workers. That group of kids from my neighborhood were right in the middle of it all, especially this one girl, Ileana. Her first job out of college was with AmeriCorps Climate, restoring wetlands and bayous in coastal Louisiana. Most of her friends were in her union, including some oil workers in transition. They took apart old pipelines and got to work planting mangroves with the same salary and benefits. Of course, when it came to healing the land, we had huge gaps in our knowledge. Luckily, Indigenous communities offered generational expertise to help guide the way. Ileana got restless, tried her hand as a solar plant engineer for a while, but eventually made her career in raising the next generation as part of the Universal Child Care Initiative. As it turns out, caring for others is valuable, low-carbon work, and we started paying real money to folks like teachers, domestic workers, and home health aides. Those were years of massive change, and not all of it was good. When Hurricane Sheldon hit southern Florida, parts of Miami went underwater for the last time. But as we battled the floods, fires, and droughts, we knew how lucky we were to have started acting when we did. And we didn't just change the infrastructure, we changed how we did things. We became a society that was not only modern and wealthy, but dignified and humane too. By committing to universal rights like healthcare and meaningful work for all, we stopped being so scared of the future. We stopped being scared of each other, and we found our shared purpose. Ileana heard the call too, and in 2028, she ran for office in the first cycle of publicly funded election campaigns. And now she occupies the seat that I once held. I couldn't be more proud of her, a true child of the Green New Deal. When I think back to my first term in Congress, riding that old school Amtrak in 2019, all of this was still ahead of us. And the first big step was just closing our eyes and imagining it. We can be whatever we have the courage to see.
Good evening. I'm Laura Sparks, president of the Cooper Union, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to our historic Great Hall. As you may know, the Cooper Union is a small but mighty institution. Our mission is to sustain the Cooper Union as a free center of learning and civic discourse that inspires inventive, creative, and influential voices in architecture, art, and engineering to address the critical challenges of our time. Climate change certainly fits that bill. This issue is urgent, and it impacts all of us. This is one of many issues where young people are truly leading the way. And at Cooper, we have the good fortune of being surrounded by students who are incredibly motivated, they are mobilizing, they are committed, they are smart, and they are getting it done. They are developing real solutions and new approaches for our community, our city, our nation, and communities around the globe. Sometimes the best thing we can do is to get out of their way, to clear the way for them to push us forward. To that end, it is my honor and my privilege to introduce you to two amazing Cooper students who have curated an incredible lineup of Climate Week programming, beginning with tonight. Please join me in welcoming these two fierce women who are paving the way, Elisa Petrosova and Sophie Schneider.
Thank you so much, President Sparks. And good evening, everyone. My name is Sophie Schneider, and I'm a fourth-year student here in the School of Engineering.
And my name is Elisa Petrosova, and I'm a third year in the School of Art, and it is our great pleasure to welcome you to the Great Hall. We are honored to be on the stage and would like to acknowledge how lucky we all are to have a space like this and the privilege to be part of the solutions in the fight for climate justice. For those of you that might not know, the Cooper Union is a college of architecture, art, and engineering with programs that are among the top in the country. As you just saw, we are an academic institution committed to advancing public discourse. This stage has hosted 160 years worth of those conversations with famous scientists, artists, politicians, and scholars, and with everyday people gathering here in the Great Hall to shape the pressing issues of their time. And we continue today with Naomi Klein and Varshini Prakash, two of the leading voices in the climate crisis movement.
We came together with engineering professor Amanda Simpson to curate Cooper Union Climate Week, a series of events that provide space for the Cooper Union and the larger community at hand to work across disciplines to discuss the most critical issue of our generation, the climate crisis. Unchecked capitalism has led to a blind comfort that has become unsustainable for our planet, and the time is now to reject business as usual. I came to the Cooper Union to try to better understand the engineers' role in the climate emergency. I knew that engineers were both in part responsible for our current situation, as well as held the capacity to bring us towards a sustainable future. A course I took my freshman year here confirmed exactly that. By connecting theory to practice and engineering design to a larger societal issue, I understood how I might be part of a solution and discovered a way to be optimistic.
I took a course in my second year, and one thing became clear. Many important things would be ending within my lifetime: bees, clean water, relative peace, and the luxury of complacency. My 5-year plan became obsolete. The world I was preparing for would not exist. As an aspiring curator, I was stumped. How could I address the climate crisis? I can't build a solar panel. I don't know how to create ionic liquid-based electrolytes with silica nanoparticles for quasi-solid state solar cells. But I came to realize that culture is at the forefront of change and that I actually could help. We invited Varshini here because we were inspired by her fearless undergraduate activism at the University of Massachusetts, where she took on the fossil fuel industry by pushing her university to stop investing in coal, oil, and gas, and this quickly led to the founding of Sunrise, an international youth-led political movement that's working to stop climate change, take back our democracy from big oil, and elect leaders who will fight for our generation's health and well-being.
And Naomi Klein, who has inspired us with her long-term commitment to studying the climate crisis and her tireless work empowering us to make the changes that we can no longer afford to delay. Even in the midst of continually devastating news, she shows us a way to fight for a livable future. Released today, On Fire, The Burning Case for a Green New Deal, situates climate as a profound political challenge. It argues that if we want to address our ecological crisis, we must also confront our social and economic crises as well.
Klein is an award-winning journalist and columnist, as well as the co-founder of the climate justice organization, The Leap. She has written international bestsellers, including The Shock Doctrine, No Logo, This Changes Everything, and No is Not Enough. Klein is a senior correspondent for The Intercept and a contributor for both The Nation and The Guardian. She is the inaugural Gloria Steinem Endowed Chair in Media, Culture, and Feminist Studies at Rutgers University and a Puffin Writing Fellow at Type Media Center.
This is the first event of Cooper Union Climate Week. We hope you come back for more of our scheduled events. On Thursday evening, we will hear from prominent climate activists from the New York City Youth Climate Movement. And on Monday, we will hear from Bill McKibben and Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson on the evolution of the climate movement over time here in the Great Hall. And later in the year, please join us on November 12th when the author of The God of Small Things, Arundhati Roy, will discuss life on Earth in the midst of an environmental crisis with Naomi Klein. For more information, please visit the Cooper Union event page.
Don't forget to stay after tonight's discussion for the book signing of Naomi Klein's On Fire. Without further ado, please join us in welcoming Naomi Klein to the stage.
Now, you all know that every week is Climate Week, right? Who here is ready for a Green New Deal? All right. Now, are you really ready for a Green New Deal? Because we are up against some determined foes who are going to lie, cheat, and steal to stop us. So we're not going to win if we're kinda in favor of a Green New Deal. We are going to have to be on fire for a Green New Deal. Are you on fire for a Green New Deal? Yes! I want to thank Cooper Union for welcoming us into this storied space. Laura Sparks, Elisa, and Sophie, thank you for that beautiful welcome. I want to thank my incredible publisher, Simon & Schuster, for everything you've done believing in this book before it was even a thing, and supporting me. My friend and colleague, Anthony Arnove, who is the agent on this book. Anthony, I cherish you. Thank you. I want to thank our independent bookseller out front, The Strand. Thank you for supporting independent booksellers. And my family. My son, Toma, is out there somewhere. My husband, Avi Lewis, who is always my first editor, but in this case was a little less available because he was on fire for a Green New Deal. I'm fighting for a Green New Deal in a couple of countries while I was working, which was very distracting. He also was the one of the producers and the co-writer of the AOC video that you just watched, A Message from the Future. And of course, let's hear it for Molly Crabapple and her unbelievable guests. So I would love to see your faces a little bit, if that's possible. I want to see who's in the room. If I could just see, if you could bring up the house lights just a little bit. Thank you. It's great to see you. So this book is called On Fire. And it doesn't just refer to the fire you think it refers to, the planetary fires, the climate fires. We live in a time of 3 fires. And one of those fires are the climate fires. These are the forces that are leading to record-breaking year after record-breaking year of heat. July was the hottest year on record. These are the heat-trapping gases that are leading to the bleaching and death of our beautiful coral reefs, the melting of our glaciers and Arctic ice, the devouring of ancient forests to wildfires. These are the climate fires, and I'm not going to belabor the point because I think you know that we are at a very dangerous place. The scientific community has begun to speak in very clear language to get our attention. And almost exactly a year ago, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a report telling us that we had 12 years, that's 11 now, to cut global emissions in half. Not to start doing it in 11 years, but to have gotten it done in 11 years and to completely decarbonize our economies globally by mid-century. So we are in an extremely tight window where we have a chance of dousing some of these flames before they get completely out of control. But we also live in a time where there is a different kind of inferno, which is also spreading very quickly, continent to continent, country to country, from Trump's United States to Bolsonaro's Brazil, to Modi's India, to Duterte's the Philippines, to the European Union that allows tens of thousands of people to drown in the Mediterranean. These are the fires of strong men unleashing the fires of hatred, of racial, ethnic, religious, and gender supremacy, pitting the vulnerable against the protected, creating these in-groups and out-groups within countries and between countries, and especially at the borders. And they are defining the other as the criminal, the security threat, the invader, the monster, setting fires that, like those climate fires, they cannot hope to control, nor do they care to, because these fires of hatred serve them so well. They pit us against each other. They keep us busy for the real business at hand, which is the plundering of the last precious resources of our beautiful planet. That is the agenda. Trump cracks open protected wildlife in Alaska. He yearns to buy Greenland. Bolsonaro says the Amazon is his virgin, not your virgin. And all of this plunder, of course, feeds those very real fires, those climate fires, in the ultimate feedback loop. And as people are displaced from their homes, from the fires, from the storms, most recently in the Bahamas, as they move, as they seek sanctuary, as they seek safety, as is their right as human beings, then those fires of hatred further descend, close in, and turn against them. And increasingly, we're seeing mass shooters describe themselves as eco-fascists and say, in Christchurch, in El Paso, that part of what is driving their hatred, apparently, is concern for the environment. These are the fires that we are up against as the climate clock strikes midnight. Never has so much life been on the line. But there is one thing that we all have to understand, and that's why I asked you if you were on fire or not, because there is a third fire, and it is blazing, and it is our fire, and we have to feel it, and we have to believe in it, and we have to be ready to fight fire with fire. Because ours is a fire that rejects hatred, that rejects the profitable system that hatred serves so well. These are the fires of the youth climate strikers spreading around the world. I like what the youth climate strikers in the UK said a few months ago. They said, Greta is the spark, but we are the wildfire. And on March 15th, they had climate strikes on every continent, and they had thousands of strikes, and 1.6 million people participated, and they're just getting started because on Friday they have asked the rest of us to join them. People of all ages. And we are seeing these fires, these righteous fires of justice spreading. We're seeing pledges of workers at tech companies like Amazon and Microsoft saying we're going to walk off the job in our high carbon sectors and demand that our companies act. And here in New York City, we'll hear more about it, but Foley Square is where it starts, and there'll be more information about it. We see the fires of Extinction Rebellion, which has shut down the city of London a couple of times, people coming together in assemblies and declaring a people's emergency from below. And we also have the fires of the fossil fuel divestment movement. And by the way, something absolutely, you heard that Varshini got her start in the fossil fuel divestment movement. So many young organizers did, but today was a huge day for our movement because today the University of California system, the whole University of California system that is $80 billion, finally announced they are divesting from fossil fuels. And you know, today is Constitution Day, so it is a great day to remember the fires of the youth climate trial, the Our Children's Trust trial, 21 young people who are suing the United States government for failing to protect their constitutional right to a livable future. So we see these fires coming from so many different directions, but I think none is blazing brighter than the fires of an organization that takes its name from that ball of fire in the sky, the Sunrise Movement. And I know many of you are here today. Sunrise is a young organization, and they have already made all kinds of history. Those of you who maybe are not familiar with the name Sunrise, I think are familiar with their activism. They came to national attention when, after the Democrats won back the House in the midterm elections, Sunrise didn't waste any time with congratulations. Instead, they decided to occupy the office of Nancy Pelosi and demand a Green New Deal. And they were visited by some young congresswomen who had not yet even been sworn in, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, like Rashida Tlaib. And the momentum started to build, and sure enough, here we are, where the vast majority of all of the contenders to lead the Democratic Party all have to pledge their allegiance to a Green New Deal. And even though the DNC has so far refused their calls to have a climate debate, CNN devoted 7 hours, in large part because of the pressure from the Sunrise Movement, to talking about the climate emergency, as they put it on their screen. It was an absolute landmark. Later this week, we're going to see a similar commitment of airtime by MSNBC. So this is a huge shift. It is a huge shift, and we're seeing it reflected in the polling. We're seeing it reflected in huge support for the Green New Deal, and all of this is wonderful, and none of it makes a difference unless we win a Green New Deal. Which is why I am so excited to be joined here for the launch of this book by one of my personal heroes, the executive director of the Sunrise Movement, Varshini Prakash. Please join me, Varshini.
Oh, there we go. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and a huge congratulations to Naomi Klein for this incredible book. I am so excited about it and the journey that you're going to be on, telling so many thousands of people about it. Shout out to my young people in the crowd, wherever. I can't exactly see you, but I know you're there. There you are. Thank you to the folks who are planning youth climate strikes, who are part of Sunrise Movement, who are part of Fridays for Our Future, and also for so many others who have come out tonight and who are going to be a part of this intergenerational fight to save our planet and our future. So thank you for being here. I have the distinct honor of interviewing and having a conversation with you about this tremendous book. And I'll be honest, this is kind of surreal for me, because I remember reading Shock Doctrine when I was like 20 years old. Yeah, great book, right? When I was about 20 years old. And it was really, first of all, it was the only nonfiction book that I have ever been able to not put down, like 10 pages in. And I would read it on the bus, I would read it late at night, and then I would get scared so I couldn't go to sleep, so I'd read it again. And it was just really incredible, and it actually informed, interestingly, a lot of my thinking about the climate crisis and what happens in the aftermath of disaster. So even picked that one up. That's a really good one as well. And I'm kind of curious, I wanted to kick things off by asking you, I think you are so good at elegantly describing the way in which neoliberalism, our economy, and the climate crisis, both in their sort of timelines and also in the way that
their effects on everyday people is playing out right now and has been sort of crescendoing for the last 40 years. Do you mind speaking to that a little bit? Because I learned a lot from that analysis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear how the shock doctrine informed your climate analysis, because it certainly informed mine, right? I mean, because that book is not a climate book, but it does begin and end with Hurricane Katrina. And that was, when I was in New Orleans, in the midst of that disaster and watching the sort of feeding frenzy for the, to basically privatize the whole city and create this sort of, gold rush there. It felt like a glimpse of the future. Like this is what our economic system will produce under climate change. We will have neglected public infrastructure that can't withstand the heavy weather, and we will have white supremacy and this toxic soup, and then Halliburton and Bechtel and Blackwater will ride in and just create even more misery and inequality on the backs of it. And so I that's what sort of started me on the journey of what's our plan, like in the aftermath of these shocks, because I remember like after Katrina, there was a feeling like, oh, maybe it's sort of impolite to talk about climate change. People are hurting. Let's not politicize it, right? But so the argument I make in this book, and some of you have heard me make before, is that if we want to understand why we have failed to rise to this existential crisis, I don't think it is the case that, like the New York Times keeps telling us, it's just our human nature that we just don't actually want to have a habitable planet, that we're just too, we think too short term.
I hate my future. I don't know about you guys.
Yeah, but we keep hearing these elite appeals to human nature, right? Like that we've met the enemy is us, and it makes people feel incredibly hopeless, because if it's true, we really are screwed. Like if it's baked into our DNA, then we may as well throw in the towel. And we've heard this again and again. I don't think that's true. I think that I think there are definitely parts of our nature that make this hard. But I think humans are many things. We are complicated. We are also creatures of community, compassion, solidarity. There are human civilizations that know how to think 7 generations into the future and into the past. So it isn't true that we are one thing. It is true that the climate crisis landed in our laps as a species at the high point of the neoliberal economic project. So 1988 is, the year that James Hansen testifies on Capitol Hill and says, I now, have 99% certainty that we're warming the planet. And, the next year the Berlin Wall collapses and Francis Fukuyama declares the end of history, and on and on. So I'm not going to do a big seminar about neoliberalism, but the point is that this mistiming between the ideology of hyper-individualism, government's the problem, not the solution. The 9 most dangerous words in the English language are I'm from the government and I'm here to help, as Ronald Reagan said. That ideology is a terrible mismatch for a crisis that requires huge investments in the public sphere, exactly what you're calling for with the Green New Deal, right? So I think it helps to understand that it is a system created by some humans, resisted by other humans. But I also think for you, when I see the energy in Sunrise, right, and the openness to a huge vision like a Green New Deal, to me it's striking that so many of the young people all the young people that you're organizing grew up in the aftermath of the 2008 economic crisis. So since then, neoliberalism has been, like Krugman calls it, a zombie ideology. Like there aren't a lot of people out there that will actually argue it on its merits, right? And so it feels to me like your generation and younger has not been as ideologically indoctrinated in the hyper-individualism, the market is always right, government's always the problem. So do you, but on the other hand, you've grown up fully within a sort of a market matrix, right? So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I mean, I think about the fact that I was, in the 3rd grade when the Twin Towers, when 9/11 happened. I was in high school when the recession happened, and many of my peers were wondering, like, are we going to have jobs? Am I just going to be, $100,000 in debt and have no future to actually, no path to employment? Seeing, and then getting a little bit older and seeing mass shootings rise and kids just being scared to go to theaters, to schools, to walk down the street, all kinds of things that have been happening also in Black and brown communities for a very, very long time. And yeah, this feeling of something is fundamentally wrong, and we have fundamentally been let down by the institutions that are supposed to protect us on a wide variety of issues. And feeling also this deep sense of frustration and feeling this deep sense that something is broken if we can't tackle the greatest crises of our lifetimes, whether it's economic inequality or the climate crisis, and come out the end, and that our institutions and the people who are in them at this moment are not serving us. So I think that has been a huge part of how people have grown up in this moment. There's this kid in Sunrise, his name is Jeremy. You may have seen a video that he was in a little bit.
Jeremy.
Yeah, he's great. But he has this beautiful story that he tells where he's like, when I was a kid and I was growing up and I realized all of these things, I had to grow up really fast. And now we are asking our politicians to grow up and to face the crises that we're experiencing, right?
But, I think what you're describing explains why things are moving so quickly, like how it could be that, a couple of years ago, the only kind of climate response that was even fathomable was a carbon tax or cap and trade, and here we are talking about remaking the entire economy, and, every presidential candidate has to actually take that idea seriously and if not support that plan, come up with an alternate plan. When I think about the sort of the climate movement that I was first exposed to, it was the kind of inconvenient truth era climate movement where even the name inconvenient truth, if the premise is, well, it's like everything is okay except for the inconvenient matter that we are cooking the planet. And so unfortunately we have to change a few little things, but we're going to try to make them as minor as possible so you don't notice, right? And so I mean, if you think the system is working for you, and certainly we know that the system actually wasn't working for a great many people in this country and certainly outside of it, well, then you're going to try to come up with solutions that don't rock the boat. But if you know, as you're saying, that the system is actually failing you on all these other fronts, then you're going to be way less afraid of the kind of change we actually need, right? And so I think that really explains the shift that we're in.
Yeah, I'm actually curious if you can expand on that. I think there's a question that lots of people have had, and I've been asked on like a daily or weekly basis, like, is the Green New Deal going too far? Like, are we, there's all this stuff about racial justice and economic inequality and like jobs and health. Like, what? Yeah, why so big?
I think you just really like that I have to answer this instead of you for once.
I'm really curious about your answer to it. I'm bored of me saying it,
Yeah, I mean, look, I honestly think that one of the biggest problems we have is that we are trying to organize for a holistic vision for the next economy in the context of a progressive movement that is very fractured, that has been kind of funneled into these issue silos for complicated reasons, including that's something that foundations have tended to encourage, right? It's something that is kind of easier to fundraise for. It's also a legacy of systematic attacks on the left that have made people afraid of saying, actually, I have an alternate vision for how the world should work. And made it was safer to just say, no, I just work on women's issues, I just work on racial justice, I just work, on wages or whatever it is, and just carve up this system, which is a holistic system, and the right understands these issues to be connected. But for a long time, I think progressives went into their little issue silos. We're working on climate, we're not working on immigration, whatever it is. And so now when the Green New Deal gets put forward, people's heads kind of explode and go, oh my God, it's too big. And it's a different theory of how the world should work, is what it is, right? It's a big question. I think that the justice elements of the Green New Deal make it more popular, not less. When I published This Changes Everything in 2014, I talked about it in different contexts, including I spent some time in Europe. I met with Syriza, Podemos, and it was really interesting because Southern Europe was in still in the grips of the economic crisis. They were being handed wave after wave of brutal economic austerity. And what these left parties were saying literally was, we cannot ask people to care about climate change when they have to put food on the table. Which is the exact same thing that the Yellow Vest movement in France is saying. You care about the end of the month, you care about the end of the world, we care about the end of the month. And so this idea that somehow it makes it a harder sell, that we're linking it with creating a fairer economy that is going to help people put food on the table at the end of the month, the people who need it most, is crazy. This actually makes it so much more politically powerful. People are going to fight for that future because it's better than their present. Not just because it's better than like some future climate apocalypse, but because it's better than Tuesday. But I also think, and this was the idea behind the message from the Future video, which we actually scrambled to get done for Sunrise's Green New Deal tour. But we did that because, first of all, we felt like we needed an image, a picture in our minds of what we were working towards, but also just because I feel like we need stories, right? This question that keeps coming up, what's healthcare doing in there? What does art have to do with the Green New Deal? And there are connections to be made, but I think in some ways politicians are the worst people to be making those connections, because politicians do think in lists, right? And you check things off. And so I think it's up to movements, and it's up to artists and writers as well to sort of tell the stories of how healthcare can't be pried apart, and how women's rights can't be pried apart, and that's really narrative work. So I don't think we should wait for politicians to do it. Yeah,
I think that's exactly right. And yeah, politicians have to play this very specific role of trying to get things done within the confines of the existing reality, which is not actually the place where really innovative, vision-based work happens, where we're conceiving of new possibilities, right? And so I think it's actually incumbent upon all of us to be carrying that story forward, and to be supporting people in our communities to really envision what this new future could look like. I guess in the vein of looking at our new future, but actually taking a trip back through time, so many of these parts of what you just mentioned, whether it's healthcare and the arts and environmental protection and job creation and improved justice and all of that for marginalized communities, so much of that was actually present during the New Deal, and I also think there are a number of cautionary tales from that as well. Can you talk a little bit about the namesake of the Green New Deal and yeah, share more about that?
Yeah, I think there have been big debates about whether the New Deal is worth invoking at all because of the many exclusions, and I can list them. African American workers were excluded from many of the most critical programs. Domestic workers, overwhelmingly women of color, were excluded. Agricultural workers were excluded. Many of the programs were segregated, and and many of the relief programs actively discriminated in the South against African American families and Mexican families. So there's no doubt that the New Deal carries many cautions and warnings. The reason why I think it is still worth invoking has to do with what we started with, which is the legacy of neoliberalism and the war on the imagination that 40 years of neoliberalism or even more has left us with. A lot of people really genuinely cannot imagine the kind of collective effort that it would take to rise to this enormous challenge. And so I think the onus really is on us to mine our history, failures and all, right? To say, okay, here are examples when we moved amazingly quickly in 9 years, right? Under the New Deal, 10 million jobs were created. Many Americans still get their water from reservoirs that were dug during the New Deal. They send their kids to schools that were built in the New Deal. They get books out from libraries that were built under the New Deal. I mean, it electrified much of rural America. There was an artistic renaissance, and 2.3 billion trees were planted by the Civilian Conservation Corps. There are many cautions in that as well, because we do need to be thinking about planting reforestation on that scale again. But I think indigenous land rights has to be front and center, and it has to. So that's just one example of how we have to be. We can't just paint the New Deal green. And I think the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's and Ed Markey's resolution, is very explicit about not only not repeating the failures of the original New Deal, but also redressing them. Like, this is a process of repair, and a core principle of climate justice, and let's be clear, this is a climate justice initiative, is that the people who got the worst deal under the current extractive economy need to really be first to benefit from the transition away from fossil fuels. And that's exciting. That's exciting. I mean, and another piece of this, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this as well, and this is something Avi talks about a lot, is that, we are in this incredibly fractured time. And one thing a Green New Deal does is it brings a sense of common mission, which is something I think people are hungry for. And even if it is being attacked relentlessly on Fox News, I mean, one of the things that FDR did very well is he brought his enemies on board by just putting projects in their backyards, right? So the reason when he was reelected with an even bigger mandate was, I mean, for instance, the Civilian Conservation Corps, where you had hundreds of camps fanning out across the country. If you look at where those camps were located, they were systematically located in the communities that voted against FDR. Yeah, the first time. And lo and behold, a bunch of jobs go to their communities. The point is this could actually really change the map of the political polarization around climate action. I really think it has that potential.
Yeah, I think that's right.
But what about this common narrative? I mean, do you feel like that sort of? I mean, one of the things I love about Sunrise is like you talk about building a youth army, but it's a culture as well, right? I mean, people are already getting that sense of collective mission. They're living it. They're living in Sunrise houses. Can you talk a little bit about how you're organizing differently? I mean, not to make you sound like a cult or anything.
Yeah, happy to. So, Sunrise is only a couple years old. We started in the summer of 2017, but we have grown rapidly since then. I think one of the things that so I can talk a little bit culturally. I also think there are some things that make us different sort of strategically. Which one do you want? Both? Yeah? Okay. Culturally, I think it is really depressing, the climate science and the state of the world that we are in. And in the midst of that, the best thing about being a part of Sunrise and a part of a youth movement is that we are so damn sure that we are going to bring joy every day in the midst of that. Yeah, there it is. And so that's been a big part of it. You know, some of us do weird things like we sing together. We, you know, host community potlucks. There's a real community. I'm based in Boston, and the hub there is fantastic. It's like everything from kids who are 13 and 14 years old in middle schools to folks who are in high school, who are in college, who never went to school, who are graduated and working. There's a diverse array of people who are actually there, and it feels like people have really found themselves community in addition to the cause. And that is something that I think we're going to need. We're going to need each other in the trenches, day in and day out, fighting. And in the midst of that, just being sort of like caught up in the clenches of urgency and just like caught up in the tremendous despair and anguish and pain of the world, I think serves us at moments. And I think processing that and participating sort of emotionally and physically in that is important. And at the same time, if we don't have the joy in the resistance, I think we're not going to get very far. So that's a big thing. We have a deep sense of storytelling that I think is important. I sort of got into the climate movement at a time when we were doing a lot of talk about polar bears and about parts per million and carbon. And I don't know about y'all, there might be a greater concentration of this in this room than out there. But I don't know that many people who are like super hype about decarbonization. But I do know a lot of people who have had personal experiences and deep emotional relationships to the crisis and have a story to share about that. And so we have a deep emphasis on storytelling as a result. And I think knowing why each of us have skin in the game and what we have at stake is really important to, A, seeing each other as human and participating in this movement together, but also like, you know, keeping the fire alive in each of us, like knowing what we personally have to lose and also what we have to gain in coming together to fight it. And then on the strategy side, I think something that's interesting and of note over the last few years is I think people on our side have had a real allergy to politics and the political system, and felt really like, you know, politics is kind of dirty, we're just going to leave that over here, we're just going to be over here, and the funding structure really doesn't help with that. And there's just a situation that gets set up where I think a lot of our work has been not apolitical, but it hasn't actually been engaging and contesting in centers of power in our politics and in our media. And I think what Sunrise is trying to do is say, hell no, like we're gonna go straight at you, to our politicians, to people who have the power to make changes in our lives and are refusing to do so, either because their pockets are lined with big oil dollars or because they're too scared or because they just don't know anything about the issue and don't know what to do. And saying like, you have a responsibility. You have a responsibility in this moment to treat this crisis like the emergency that it is. And so they should do that. So I think Sunrise has really tried to merge both protest organizing and social movement organizing with electoral organizing, to not just contest on the outside, but to be putting people in office who are going to make it a lot easier. Which seems like a no-brainer, but it took us a minute to figure it out. And now we will know that forevermore. And the right has taken this very, very seriously. There has been an extremely deliberate 40-year strategy. They've built the infrastructure. They've built the political power. They have
put people like Rex Tillerson in office and, Andrew Wheeler to head the EPA and people like that who are just delivering on the agenda that the Koch brothers have been creating for the last 40 years. And we've got to get just as serious.
But, one thing I would add, and we were both at a conference about the Green New Deal a few days ago, where this sort of think tank infrastructure that the right has was laid out, and it's true that we are out-organized when it comes to that the architecture for making sure your ideas are the ones in front of politicians, and Lord knows we're never going to have the amount of money they have for think tanks and so on. But one thing I think that's really important to keep in mind is that part of the reason the right has to invest in that infrastructure is because so many of their ideas are so profoundly unpopular and counterintuitive and just plain wrong, right? So we do need a counter strategy, but I think what we're seeing and what we've seen in this past year is we can tip things back really quickly with a fraction of the money just because we're right and they're so incredibly wrong. Yeah.
Totally. And I can tell you right now, we did not have a lot of money when we did what we did. So talk about a fraction. No, I think that's exactly right. And I think what we've seen in the last year is how quickly things can move when you actually go on the offensive. We've got to stop sitting on our heels and constantly playing defense, because I think that's how we actually lose ground and lose ground and lose ground. And I think what's exciting about the Green New Deal and the vision that you're sort of laying out here is that's going on the offensive. What kind of policy we want, what kind of movement we want, who's a part of it, what kind of country we want, like who we are as a people.
And I mean, coming back to your question before about, this issue of like, oh, it's too big, it's too much. That work of explaining exactly where healthcare fits in, right? That's the work of, I spoke to, I think, 1,800 nurses a few days ago, a meeting of National Nurses United, who had a panel about the Green New Deal. And, they're part of, and they just passed a resolution officially supporting it. SCIU has passed a resolution supporting it. And a lot of unions are, have come out supporting the climate strike on Friday. What we really need is for unions, I think, to take a lead in organizing their members, creating town halls to say, like, okay, what does a Green New Deal mean in every school in this country, right? Like, how do we get our schools to, zero carbon, 100% renewable energy? How do we do it in a way that's going to create better jobs for teachers and better schools for kids and create a vision that is really, really exciting? So there's lots of, this is an organizing opportunity, I guess is what I'm saying. And that story, I mean, like, it's amazing to me that I keep getting these questions of like, what does healthcare have to do with climate change? I was in Puerto Rico after Maria, and in the 6 months after Maria hit, we think around 3,000, possibly more people died. They did not die from falling debris. They died because a healthcare system had been systematically neglected, underfunded, partially privatized. And the electricity system had likewise been systematically neglected, getting ready for privatization. And so when those powerful winds blew, the whole thing collapsed. And then nobody came to the rescue. And so what actually steals lives, in these disasters is like, during Katrina, it is the intersection between between white supremacy, a legacy of neoliberalism, colonialism, austerity, and then climate change layers on top of that. So of course it's all connected, right? It is a single system. And I think even in the way we tell the story of what produced climate change, like, is it carbon in the atmosphere, or is it a crisis of an extractive mindset that treats nature like a machine and treats people as if they're disposable and sacrificable? Like, it matters how we tell a story of what produced the carbon, right? Because that will also inform the story of how we get out of that crisis as well. Yeah.
I I have one last question that I am curious about. I know, I'm curious how you think about grief in this moment, about defeatism. I think there are a lot of people on all sides of the spectrum here. There have been some articles written in the last week or so about this in particular. Yeah, just curious about how you're thinking about this, and also like meeting your beautiful son backstage and as a mother, and just what that means for you in this moment as yeah.
Yeah. I mean, look, I think I feel all the things. I feel grief, I feel terror, I feel hope, excitement. I think that I try to stay in close touch with the love that drives my work, that it is not all fear-based. There is fear there, and it is real, and we should be afraid. But the reason it is so terrifying is because of the underlying love for one another, and for the natural world. I mean, like, I know we diss polar bears, but I like them. And for me, I think a lot about my family's in the Pacific Northwest. My son was born in British Columbia, and we talk a lot about salmon. Salmon is it's a great teaching for us in terms of understanding how ecosystems work, right? And I mean, salmon are just these incredibly generous creatures that hold entire ecosystems and human cultures on their backs, and they feed the forest and they feed the oceans, and and they don't like warm water. They do not like warm water, and they're not doing well right now. And so when I think about that, when I think about having to I really want them to make it, and that's connected to all that I love, right? And so more and more I really try to feel it, hold on to it, not push it away, because I think we do need a love-based movement. I think it's really important as we face the fears of what we have unleashed, what fossil fuel companies and agribusiness companies and fossil fuels money-soaked politicians have unleashed, because it isn't all of us equally. I think we have to remember that nature is not our enemy, because when you've been to Paradise, California, you've seen what a wildfire can do to a place. I've walked through the debris of many hurricanes in my reporting. I mean, it is fearsome, right? But the kinds of disasters that we're seeing are not natural right now. It has to do with the fact that we have upset the elements of the earth. We have dug up what should be interred and put it in the sky and put it in the oceans. And I worry that we're talking so much about the fears of the natural world that people may become more disconnected from nature, which I think is a very dangerous development, because I think that we won't do the things that are necessary to protect what is left and what is precious if we're afraid of the natural world. Like, if we come to see it as a threat, if nature is this place of terror, right? It's human actions that are making the planet a dangerous place. We live on a generous planet that seeks to protect and reproduce life. And so we have to be in touch both with the dangers of upsetting that balance, but I think we can't forget that this is our home and it needs love. And when I was in Puerto Rico, I visited this really remarkable school where it's, in addition to being a regular school, it also has a farm where the young people learn agroecological farming methods. And I met this amazing woman who runs the school named Dalma Cartagena, and she was showing me around, and we were walking through this stand of wildflowers that they had planted to try to bring back the pollinators. And she said to me, I always tell the students, touch the flowers, just touch them. Because after surviving a storm like Maria, people have become afraid of nature, right? And that they have to learn, actually, this is our source of food. This is our home. We have to love it if we're gonna, survive. So grief, it's all mixed up. It's all mixed up. But I mean, I think that I don't want to be part of a movement that asks people not to feel. And I don't want to skip the phase where we actually feel the things that we're informing ourselves about, because I think that our theory of change for a long time has skipped over the feeling phase, where it's just like inform, act, and there has to be a phase where we actually sit with it, because I think a movement that is repressing emotions this big is going to be a sick movement, and we can't afford that. So we have to take care of each other, help each other feel it, not feel it alone, right? And this is, another thing that I really admire about Sunrise is that you're creating, you talk about the community that you're creating. I think you're creating a space where people are not just able to organize, right, but able to support each other through these really, really terrifying emotions that are implicit when we learn about our moment in time, right? Yeah.
Wow, that was beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, so we are going to wrap up. We read your questions. We wove them into our discussion. I want to thank Varshini so much for being here on this special night. I learned a while ago that books can educate people, but it's movements that actually get it done. And so I also learned a while ago that it's not my gift to be the ones to actually tell everybody exactly what they should do, but Varshini has that gift. And I know that you, in the questions you sent, a lot of them are just practical. You want to know how to get involved, how we make this thing happen, and Varshini's going to close us out and just tell us some next steps, okay? Yes. Don't go anywhere.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So, I think there's a few very, very concrete things that we can do. The first part of this, I always think, is we have got to know our enemy and we have got to know ourselves. And right now, our enemy is getting very, very organized. I just saw these numbers that the Koch brothers have spent $2.65 million just lobbying on the Hill against that Green New Deal resolution. $2.65 million in the last 8 months. They are getting their people organized. They are holding closed-door meetings. They are figuring out how to make this an issue in the 2020 election. And we need to do exactly the same, but for our vision of the society that we want to create. And the same as getting to know our enemy, we also need to know ourselves. We need to know that in American history, ordinary people have gotten organized and done extraordinary things, right? During the height of the civil rights movement, we saw 1 in 4 Black college students in the South participating in the movement. We saw tens of thousands of people who were getting arrested, fighting for equal rights and justice. Just 50 years ago, we saw 20 million people in the streets holding t-shirts, sitting in, and calling on their politicians to take action. In 1970, the 50th anniversary of Earth Day is going to be next year. So this was 4/22/1970. And that exact same year, we saw the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act. We saw the beginning of tons of environmental policy getting passed under politicians like Nixon in this country. So don't let them define what we think is possible in this country. So we need all of you to get involved, because I can tell you I am not going to get to that 10 million number or 20 million number myself. But that is the level of social mobilization. That is the level of social disruption. That is the level of massive action and non-cooperation that we need to stop business as usual in this country and around the world to get the action that we need and to pass a Green New Deal. So, so this Friday is the first baby step in that process. There is a monumental event that is going to be happening that has been organized by incredible activists, people like the Sunrise NYC chapter. I know you're here. The Fridays for Future. Yep. There you are. I see you guys. And tens of thousands of people are going to join in New York City. This Friday, there will be a rally at Foley Square at 12, and then a march at Battery Park at 1. Am I right, guys? Yes. Okay, great. I was like, I'm not going to get that right. But this is a way that you can participate in this movement right now. If you can't make it on that day, support on social media, have conversations with your coworkers or other students, and talk to them about what's happening in this nation and the kind of action we need to take collectively to stop it. And this is just the beginning, right? This is just the beginning. You coming here today, this action on Friday, where millions will participate around the world, and we will be joined by incredible young people like Greta Thunberg, this is just the beginning. We need to do what we do on Friday again and again and again and again. And we are not going home until we get what we came for. So if you want to join and you want to get further information, fully suggest you check out Sunrise NYC and groups like Fridays for Future on social media, but also go to sunrisemovement.org and you can sign up there as well.
Thank you, Varshini. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Naomi Klein.
I just have one thing to add. One thing I meant to mention is that at the end of this book, I have an epilogue, and it is the 9 capsule cases for a Green New Deal. So I know some of you feel like it's too intimidating, it's too expensive. How are all these issues connected? So basically what I'm trying to give you is a guide to winning an argument with the most annoying person you know, right? Who's just like, I'm just gonna play devil's advocate here. And there you have some ammo, all right? We also have this online, so if you don't want to buy the book, don't buy the book, but do have the argument, do win the argument for a Green New Deal.
Hi, everyone. So we're going to be progressing to a book signing shortly. The authors are just going to retire to the green room for about 5 minutes. You'll find guards at the end of every aisle. The guards are going to form you into the signing line. Again, wait for the guards to form you into the signing line. And if you haven't purchased a book, they are for sale in the lobby. Again, the book will be for sale in the lobby. Thank you.